Let's jump right in. Welcome back to another Explainer. Today we're going to absolutely dismantle a story you probably thought you knew inside and out. You know, the elementary school version. We're going to dive straight into the historical source materials to peel back the layers of that neat, sanitized history and reveal the gritty, complex, and highly multifaceted reality of the Revolutionary Era. Because to truly understand how this nation was born, we have to look way past the tidy myths.
Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever wondered, what if the American Revolution wasn't exactly the pristine, textbook story we so often see? Mainstream historical memory kind of gives us this baseline assumption, right? It's all about taxes, some tea in a harbor, and the founding fathers in powdered wigs calmly debating liberty. But the sources? The actual historical sources reveal a much more chaotic, intense, and frankly fascinating reality.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're breaking this down into 4 parts. First, the road to rebellion. Second, a different kind of war. Third, we'll look at the incredible women of the revolution. And finally, forging a new nation.
All right, part 1, the road to rebellion. To actually understand the rapid escalation of this conflict, we need to view it through the fresh lens of 18th century print media. That's the public discourse that really fueled the fire before the shooting even started. I mean, just look at how rapidly the physical and economic tensions escalated over a single decade. After the French and Indian War, Britain was strapped for cash, so they hit the colonies with the Stamp Act in 1765. The colonists countered with no taxation without representation, and boom, the Sons of Liberty are formed. When that didn't fix things, Britain tried taxing imports with the Townshend Acts in 1768, and the Daughters of Liberty stepped up to boycott British goods. This economic pressure cooker simmered until March 1770, when tensions in Boston completely boiled over into the Boston Massacre, leaving 5 dead. Fast forward to 1773, angry colonists are tossing East India Company tea right into Boston Harbor, and Britain claps back with the crushing Intolerable Acts of 1774. So the crucial point here is that these intolerable acts effectively forced everyone to take a side. You were either a patriot or you were a loyalist. No more middle ground.
And this shift was captured perfectly in what was basically a transatlantic propaganda war. It's often said that the revolution was precipitated by opposition and new taxes, but developed into a fight for independence. That pivot? It was largely driven by pamphlets. Seriously, think of pamphlets as the social media of the 18th century. Documents like John Dickinson's Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania in 1768, and later Thomas Paine's legendary Common Sense in 1776, they were massive conveyors of ideas. They systematically shifted public opinion, away from just wanting fair taxation to actively demanding a complete, total break from the British Crown. The idea spread like wildfire.
Moving right along to Section 2, a different kind of war.
We really need to forget what we've seen in the movies for a second, because we're going to shatter some big misconceptions about the gritty reality of battlefield tactics. Ever heard of Petite Guerre? It translates to Little War, and it was this early American approach to unlimited war. America's first way of war wasn't fought in neat, orderly lines of red and blue coats politely exchanging fire on an open field. Not at all. Historical analysis shows us it was often a brutal, highly irregular conflict. We're talking survivalist tactics, actively destroying enemy infrastructure, and yeah, even intimidating non-combatant populations. This irregular warfare was born directly out of those harsh, life-and-death struggles on the American frontier. And this brilliantly illustrates just how totally different the military cultures were. On one side, you've got the traditional European Grande Guerre. That's your formal sieges, regular armies, and limited, polite geopolitical objectives. On the other side, the American Petite Guerre. Here, irregular guerrilla operations absolutely reigned supreme. So while the European forces were trying to fight this standard state-on-state war, Americans, who were drawing from decades of frontier fighting, utilized partisan warfare. They deeply disrupted supply networks and fought with unlimited objectives in mind. It was this fiercely attritive strategy that completely and utterly upended British military expectations. They just didn't see it coming.
Okay, let's pivot to Section 3, Women of the Revolution.
Women were absolutely vital to the American cause, and their roles? Incredibly multifaceted. They definitely weren't just sitting around waiting patiently at home. You had camp followers who managed the immense, grueling domestic organization of the Continental Army. The washing, the cooking, the mending. You had women serving as dedicated medics, caring for the wounded in what were often just horrific conditions.
They were incredibly effective spies, too, cleverly leveraging the fact that British forces usually just overlook them to gather critical intelligence. And yes, absolutely, they were combatants, fighting directly on the battlefield. Take April 1777, for instance. A teenager named Sybil Luddington acted as the female equivalent of Paul Revere. But wait, here's the kicker. She rode twice as far as Revere did, through Putnam and Dutchess counties in New York, completely alone, in a driving rainstorm, all to successfully rouse the local militia against a British attack on Danbury, Connecticut. It is just an astonishing display of extreme civilian bravery, and it directly impacted the militia's readiness. Talk about a real game changer.
And the gritty reality of women's combat service gets even more intense. In 1782, Deborah Sampson disguised herself as a man named Robert Shirtliff just so she could muster into the 4th Massachusetts Regiment. She saw active combat in New York and was severely wounded. Now, to avoid her true identity being discovered by the Army physicians, she actually slipped out of a field hospital and extracted a musket bullet from her own thigh using nothing but a penknife and a sewing needle. I mean, wow, she survived, she received an honorable discharge, and she became a celebrated veteran. These are the kinds of extreme, literal do-or-die measures women took to maintain their active roles in the fight for independence.
Finally, that brings us to Section 4, Forging a New Nation.
Now, what's really interesting about the Articles of Confederation, which was our first written national charter, drafted between 1776 and 1777, is that the conventional narrative usually paints it as this anarchic failure, a weak, barely functional government crippled by deep factional conflict. But if you do a critical examination of the actual drafting process, it completely undermines that view. Actually, scratch that, it destroys that view entirely. Because what the documentation of that drafting process actually shows isn't some obsession with decentralization. It shows a profound, pragmatic drive toward union. The members of Congress displayed this remarkable, consistent willingness to compromise with one another. Larger states accommodated smaller states, like agreeing to a one-state, one-vote plan just to secure unity. They willingly surrendered elements of their own state sovereignty to ensure national authority and comity. And by comity, I mean mutual respect and legal recognition among the states. The Articles actually grew the national government in power and institutional strength, slowly but surely inching these newly independent states toward a true, functioning national federalism.
So, what does this all mean? Well, a question to leave you with. How does viewing the chaotic reality of the revolution, the irregular warfare, the pamphlet propaganda, the incredible, frankly mind-blowing sacrifices of ordinary women, and its pragmatic, compromise-driven political aftermath change our understanding of the nation's birth? Because, as we've seen, it definitely wasn't a neat, perfectly planned event. It was a gritty, complex, and brilliant evolution. I really hope this explainer has sparked your curiosity to look a little deeper into the primary sources of our history. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll catch you in the next one.